went into Fionna Cake last year with no prior knowledge beyond the obvious connection to Adventure Time and rather low expectations. In our current day of reboots and remakes and miserable live-action adaptations, I expected a little more than Adventure Time 2.0, a shallow attempt to capture the original spark and bandy it about for a quick buck. Instead, I experienced a genuinely thoughtful show that straddled the line between sequel and spin-off while feeling like a natural extension of Adventure Time. The show begins with Fionna Campbell stressing about rent and bills and her cat's odd behavior in a mundane world mirroring our own, significant for the lack of magic and color characterizing Ooh. But chance and chaos bring her and Cake to Ooh, where they crash into Prismo and Simon Petrikov and embark on an adventure that sends them across the multiverse, pursued by a cosmic entity hell-bent on erasing Fionna and Cake for a promotion. The multiverse and how the show used it really caught my eye. The past few years have seen a surge of pop culture multiverses, a setting with a long history in science fiction, and I really liked how Fionna and Cake handled its multiverse. Fionna and Cake distinguishes itself from Adventure Time by aging its cast and giving them unique challenges that relate to different aspects of adulthood, and it uses the multiversal setting to inspire character growth by forcing the characters to face their weaknesses and insecurities. Even more interestingly, it uses the multiverse to weave a powerful statement about the role of fiction in our adult lives. The key to understanding how Fionna and Cake leverages its multiverse lies in how it ages the characters beyond Adventure Times, at least in terms of their problems, given that some of Ooh's residents are centuries old, and gives them age-appropriate struggles and worries. With Fionna, Cake, Simon, and even the Scarab, our antagonist, representing different kinds of adulthood. By examining where these characters begin and where their arcs take them, we can understand how the show leverages its multiverse as a tool for character growth. Fionna kicks off the story dreaming of being a hero in a Sailor Moon-inspired sequence where she triumphs over a living hedgehog bus. An interesting symbol once we factor in that Fionna works as a guide on a bus tour and hates her job. By many metrics, Fionna is an adult. She lives on her own, has a job, at least starts the episode with a job, and her concerns are primarily financial, trying to make rent, finding money to take Cake to the vet, but a deeper, less external discontent plagues her.
Maybe it doesn't matter where. What if she's just bored with everything and wishes the world was more magical? It should be more magical.
Fionna also has a distinct selfish side that we see when she derails the bus tour to discuss her recent dream and ensures that focus remains on her when the others begin dissecting their own dreams. It's important to consider that this never reads as a malicious selfishness. Fionna simply doesn't appear to think about how her actions impact others or that they have consequences. This selfishness stems from a lack of empathy that the story ultimately corrects. I would describe Fionna's arc as bringing her from a place of selfishness to one of empathy, a shift that occurs because her sojourn across the multiverse brings her into contact with many different people from differing backgrounds and with diverse perspectives, thus broadening her own horizons and forcing her to reframe how she thinks about her life. Cake has a vividly different experience. Beginning her journey as an average house cat, she has little autonomy and lacks any significant means of communication, relying on Fionna to interpret her meows and behaviors. Cake is effectively repressed, which doesn't change until she escapes from Simon's skull and secures the ability to speak. Cake finds herself in Ooh, literally finding her voice by venturing beyond the confines of her hometown. Her arc runs in the opposite direction of Fionna's. As Fionna learns empathy and restraint and that actions have consequences, Cake's arc is all about surpassing limits and interacting with a world that offers her more than she ever imagined. We could read Cake as the youngest of the group through this lens, finding her footing amid newfound freedom. Including Simon in the story was a brilliant move.
It gives us just enough connection to the original Adventure Time cast to feel like a continuation rather than just a spin-off, and I thought Simon was relatively underserved by the final. The crown's curse was broken, freeing him from the Ice King, and the brief glimpses we caught of him during the final rendition of Come Along With Me implied happiness, but I would have liked to see more for him. Fionna Cake introduces us to a jaded Simon who no longer feels like part of his world. Without the crown, he's no longer magical, so he doesn't belong in Ooo. While humans returned to Ooo at the end of Adventure Time, their technology and culture have evolved so greatly that they're as foreign as the denizens of the Candy Kingdom. He's isolated within twin cultures, surrounded by friends with partners and purpose that further heighten his own feelings of discontent. The element of adulthood Simon represents is a midlife crisis as Simon struggles to find meaning in his life and spends much of his time ruminating over his past. A conversation with Golbetti, an encounter with a very different Simon, and a trip forward in time force Simon to confront the past, both as Ice King and his relationship with Betty. It ends fairly open-endedly. He has a change in mindset, where Simon decides to embrace his life and actively work towards improving the second chance Betty gave him. And this leads us to consider the Scarab, our antagonist who wants to end Fionna and Cake and their universe. He's pretty easy to understand. Some time ago, considering that we're operating on a cosmic scale here, likely centuries, the Scarab and Prismo were candidates for the job of Wishmaster, which Prismo received. The Scarab has carried a grudge ever since, coping by taking out his frustrations on the cosmic entities his job as a cosmic auditor gives him power over. We must understand that the people the Scarab targeted were shirking cosmic duties to pursue something they loved, a dream, like opening a tea house. Through this, we can understand that the Scarab is just venting his frustrations on people bold enough to do what he does not. This wraps around his motivation. Fionna and Cake's universe was illicitly created by Prismo, then hidden in Simon's head while he was still Ice King. If the Scarab captures them and turns them in, he can prove that Prismo is unfit for the position of Wishmaster, and the Scarab can claim it. The trifecta flee across the multiverse, with Simon hunting for a magic crown so he can become powerful enough to defeat the Scarab and restore magic to Fionna and Cake's world, which faded when Golb digested the crown at the end of Adventure Time. All four of these characters share feelings of discontent with their everyday lives that they seek to mend through external factors. Simon wants the crown to drown his troubles in the curse. Fionna and Cake want to restore their magical world where they're heroes, and the Scarab wants the position he believes he's entitled to. While Fionna and Simon find peace and tranquility by changing their attitudes and mindsets, finding fulfillment in what they already have, Cake benefits greatly from the magical enhancements she gains outside of her world. The Scarab's story ends on a rather hopeful note. He's punished for his transgressions, but sentenced to work in the Time Room, where Prismo begins showing him the ropes. He failed, but still found a path to peace by changing his situation, even if that change was forced. And all of this is made possible only by a journey across the multiverse. In order to understand the value of what they had, Fionna and Simon had to see the world through a different lens, or 5, and a multiverse excels at putting different lenses on the world. In this case, Fionna and Cake's multiverse inspired change by forcing Simon and Fionna to face their insecurities, and Cake and the Scarab to change their circumstances. Once we understand how it does this, we can move on to our discussion of how the multiverse comments on fiction. The concept of the multiverse has a long history in science fiction stories. The term comes to us first from the novel The Sundered Worlds, written by Michael Moorcock and published in 1962, though we can find stories set in multiple worlds that predate it, including Lewis Carroll's Alice books and C.S. Lewis's Narnia series. Like any trope or setting or storytelling conceit, the multiverse comes with pros and cons. At its best, as Stephanie Burt put it for The New Yorker, the multiverse is a plot device, or a philosophical notion that could power interesting stories. But she also identifies its worst traits as a business tactic, one of several that enable vast entertainment companies to recycle beloved characters. On the business end, we have Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness,
Multiverse, or the 2024 movie The Flash, utilizing multiverses for dramatically hollow stories tinged with nostalgia and colored by cameos. But then we have a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once, using its multiverse as a narrative device to challenge its protagonist's assumptions about her life and open her mind to possibilities that her rigidity doesn't allow at the story's start. Within this spectrum, Fionna Cake thankfully falls towards Everything Everywhere All at Once. Though cameos abound, they rarely distract from the story, while the multiversal setting challenges the characters in unique ways. One of the tools you get when incorporating a multiverse into your story is the ability to explore established characters through new lenses, often by changing their circumstances or a key trait. Fionna Cake does this from the very first episode. Fionna is a variant of Finn with both a key differing trait, she's a woman, and exceedingly different circumstances. Her world lacks magic. We can even see a similarity in their character arcs as they both journey towards maturity. The story explores many more worlds, ranging from a desolate wasteland created in part by an adult Finn who now lives with his children, a fairy tale world, and even a dead world in which the Lich succeeded at ending all life. These worlds are perfectly tailored to challenge our characters by exposing their insecurities and making them consider what they want. Ooh gives Fionna a taste of everything she thinks her life should be, wild and magical and adventurous, and it explores that lack of empathy when she beats the hell out of a bunch of market-goers after Cake does some equally heinous nonsense. The post-apocalyptic farmland, the same world Finn once battled the Lich in and introduced the concept of the multiverse to Adventure Time, strikes a similar note for her, even as it proves that she might not be as well suited to that life as she thinks. But once Fionna begins feeling more empathy, and considering the consequences of her actions, she finds herself forced to reckon with a moral quandary that wouldn't have fazed her at the start of the show. Can she really let Simon throw his life away to become the Ice King, all for the sake of becoming a hero? The episode that best embodies this is The Winter King, which I consider not only one of the most narratively important episodes in the show, but one of its best. After fleeing Farmworld and bringing the Scarab with them, a mysterious stranger freezes him. The Winter King, a seemingly perfected version of Simon with all of the crown's power and none of its curses. He's opposed by the Candy Queen, a version of Princess Bubblegum that regularly kidnaps him. Role reversals like this are a mainstay of multiversal narratives, and arguably one of the most basic stories you can set in a parallel universe. But The Winter King develops into a beautiful riff on this trope. This is still the evil doppelganger universe, but instead of just having these two characters swap orientations, we have an evil Simon. We learn that the Winter King lied about overcoming the crown via willpower and forced the curse on Princess Bubblegum. The Winter King is the evil Simon, without the humanity or empathy our Simon displays. This episode also supercharges Simon's and Fiona's character arcs. The Winter King gives Fionna a magical sword that makes up for her lack of combat abilities, and she cuts through the evil citizens of the Candy Queen's queendom, only to learn that they were innocent candy people the entire time. She's given everything she wants, but this moment ultimately introduces her to the concept of consequences and begins building the empathy she lacked before. And the Winter King was practically designed to force Simon to face his worst fears, his insecurities, his weaknesses. He reviled his time as the Ice King, but here's a version of himself that overcame it with sheer willpower. The Winter King even dangles the hope of control before Simon, only for the reveal at the end to steal it away. Through seeing how Fionna and Simon react to the Winter King, we can understand how writers can leverage the multiverse for character growth. Traversing the multiverse gives them room to consider what it means to be who they are. Simon confronts his deeds as the Ice King while facing the Winter King, and confronts his past when he tells Fionna the story of how he and Betty met. Fiona's lofty dreams and ambitions tangle with reality, ultimately to her benefit as she finds wholeness and peace by fighting not to change her world, but but to save it. And that could be a fine story in its own right, but Fionna Cake takes it a step further by framing its multiverse as a series of fictional tales, thus making a statement about how fiction affects our lives. Fionna Cake isn't shy about slipping some fourth wall breaks into the story for quick humor. When Prismo learns of Fionna Cake's emergence into Ooh, he receives a crossover alert. The Scarab later uses crossovers as a curse. When Fionna Cake's universe becomes an official part of the multiverse at the end of the story, it becomes canonized. What could just be a few meta jokes at the show's concept takes on a much deeper meaning when we consider the device our trifecta uses to traverse the multiverse. A television remote taken from Prismo, who observes the multiverse as a television. With this lens in mind, we can consider each universe Fionna, Cake, and Simon visit as a distinct story or show, and their travels therein the appreciation of fictional works for a compelling narrative about how stories affect our lives as adults. Each world they visit has their own genres and tropes, including Fionna's world, which has strong rom-com vibes that we see with Gary and Marshall Lee and their meet-cute. The first universe we visit, Farmland, drops us in a post-apocalyptic wasteland with forbidden love and all the cheese you could expect from such a setting, including flamboyant gang members and excessive violence. Fionna considers this a comfortable, familiar setting. This is rather her ideal world, one ruled by violence and badassery, but thanks to the cheesiness and everything, Fionna doesn't seem to perceive it like real violence. It's just a game. I mean, who goes around cutting off noses and hurling cinder blocks from rooftops? Fionna considers this a world where violence has no consequence, but she quickly learns that's not true in The Winter King. Here she gets everything she wanted. It's the world where she's a hero, where things are simple, where her problems can be solved with the swipe of a sword. Fionna seeks solace within the fairy tale but doesn't find it, realizing that the simple black and white morality of the fairy tale cannot be superimposed on her life. Once we move to a universe overrun by vampires, a world as grimdark as the show can manage without wholly violating its tone, we find a world of a similarly violent tilt to Farmland, but Fionna has a newfound respect for it. In experiencing that story, Fionna was better equipped to examine the next one more critically. Fionna's trip through the narrative gave her the ability to appreciate and adore the world she had. Cake's experience of the stories is vividly different. In them, she finds her potential. They give her the room to literally stretch and grow and try new versions of herself, a canvas upon which she can experiment and craft an independent identity. Farmworld tests her freedom and willingness to go back to the life she previously lived. In the grimdark world, she makes a stand to do what she wants, on her terms. Once she returns to the mundane world, she retains these lessons, symbolized by her retention of her magical form. The story has ended, but Cake will be forever stronger for the experience. And I haven't forgotten Simon, who comes at this from a different angle because he's always taken fiction seriously. His academic career involved taking legends at face value, seeking truth from within the fiction. There's a reason that Simon's immediate response to peril is finding the nearest library, why he persists through Casper and Nova in search of a crown, and how, in the end, he comes to understand the mistakes of his past through the lens of a choose-your-own-adventure story and the help of a different perspective. This is also why Simon is less dismissive of the violence in Farmland. He takes it seriously in a way Fionna cannot, so long as she just views it as a story with no deeper meaning or value than cheap entertainment. All three characters have these experiences come to a head when they enter the Lich's world. We still have an underlined story, as Simon reveals his unbalanced romance with Betty, but it largely functions as a blank slate. It gives the trifecta time to ponder and digest the stories they experienced. And I must mention the Scarab, who also comes at this from a very different angle, as he doesn't particularly learn from the multitude of worlds he visits the way our main trifecta does.
To understand this, we need to take a step back and understand what all this looks like on a cosmic scale. I'm pitching this framework of the multiverse from the view of cosmic beings like Prismo and the Scarab, so this is inherently how they view the multiverse. It's much more interesting in this case to examine how the Scarab reacts to these worlds. He is disdainful, he thinks nothing of them, because he's jealous. The Scarab is simply suppressed and lashing out because of it. Because he doesn't get to create, he looks down on the creations of others. And in the end, the universe is canonized. The powers that be condone the creation Prismo did to alleviate his mid-eternity crisis. If the Scarab becomes redeemed, it will be through embracing his creative side and appreciating and understanding the works of others rather than tearing them down. The foray into the fictional proves quite critical for our trifecta. They enter these stories in the hopes of drowning their present problems, seeking simple escapism, but it cannot last. The inherent traits required to make a multiversal story work come into play here. They might relate or project themselves onto these characters, so like them, but they cannot escape who they are. But this is not to say that the stories are useless. They give them space to breathe, time to reflect, and the tools necessary to improve their lives. Without these works of fiction, they couldn't have grown, forged a better mental state, a better world, a better life.